My name is Tessa Wilson, and I'm 37 years old. 6 months ago, my husband James died in a sudden car accident that shattered my world completely. The weight of grief and mounting bills finally forced me to make tough decisions. Yesterday, I decided to sell his beloved garage workshop to help cover expenses. I hadn't been inside since before he died. When I finally unlocked the door, what I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about my husband. Behind a hidden wall was a secret room filled with hundreds of letters, all addressed to me. If you've ever found something unexpected that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved, drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to hear the rest of my unbelievable story. Life with James had been everything I'd ever dreamed of. We met 12 years ago at Northwestern University during our final semester. I was completing my elementary education degree while he was finishing his civil engineering program. Our first encounter happened in the campus library when we reached for the same reference book. His smile was what caught me first. Warm, genuine, with a slight dimple on his left cheek. We talked for hours that day, forgetting about our studies entirely. After graduation, our relationship blossomed quickly. James proposed on a snowy evening in Chicago, and we married when we were both 25. We decided not to have children right away, focusing instead on our careers. James excelled at his engineering firm, eventually becoming a project manager for major construction developments across the state. I found my calling teaching third graders at Lincoln Elementary School. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was solid. We laughed often, travelled when we could afford it, and built a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs. James was thoughtful, bringing me wildflowers on random Tuesdays, or leaving sweet notes in my lunch bag. We had our routines: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday night movies, summer hikes in the state park, normal, beautiful routines that I took for granted. As the years passed, we both became increasingly busy with work. James often stayed late at the office managing complex projects with tight deadlines. When he was home, he'd spend hours in his detached garage workshop, which had become his sanctuary. He converted the space shortly after we bought the house, installing workbenches, tool racks, and even a small refrigerator. It was his private domain where he tinkered with gadgets, restored old furniture, or simply unwound after stressful days. "It helps me decompress," he'd explain whenever I asked about his time there. "Just having a space that's organised exactly how I want it. It clears my head." I respected his need for solitude and rarely ventured into the garage. Looking back, I realise how strange it was that he always kept the garage key on his person. He had it on a separate keychain that he carried everywhere, even though our house keys were on a shared hook by the front door. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Everyone needs their private space, right? James had normal hobbies that never raised any red flags. He collected vintage watches, spending hours researching their history and mechanisms. He loved old films, especially film noir classics. We went hiking whenever weather permitted. He was passionate about architecture, often taking detours during our drives to admire interesting buildings. Nothing suspicious about any of that. There were moments, though, when I caught glimpses of something else beneath the surface. Sometimes James would grow quiet and distant, his eyes focusing on something I couldn't see. When I'd ask what was wrong, he'd shake his head and smile, saying it was just work stress, or that he was tired. I accepted these explanations, never pushing further. Now I wonder if those were the moments when the weight of his secrets became too heavy to bear alone. I remember one particular evening about 5 years into our marriage when I needed to borrow his power drill. James was showering, so I decided to grab it from the garage myself. The door was locked as usual, but I knew he kept a spare key in his desk drawer. When I mentioned using the drill later, his face tensed momentarily before relaxing into a smile. "I was actually planning to reorganize the shelves tonight," he said casually. "The place is a mess right now. I'll get the drill for you." He retrieved it quickly, and I thought nothing more about it. Now I wonder what would have happened if I'd insisted on going in myself that day. Would our entire relationship have unfolded differently? Would the truth have come out sooner? These are the questions that haunt me now. The morning before the accident, James kissed me goodbye at the door. He was leaving for a 3-day conference in Detroit. His last words to me were, "I love you more than you'll ever know, Tess." I replied with our usual, "Love you too," without looking up from my coffee, not realizing those words would gain such painful significance later. There were no warning signs, no premonitions. It was just an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind we'd shared hundreds of times before. If I'd known it was our final goodbye, I would have held him tighter. I would have memorized the exact shade of his eyes. I would have told him that he was the best thing that ever happened to me. But we never know when ordinary moments will become our final memories of the people we love. The policeman arrived at our doorstep at 11:42 p.m. I remember checking the clock when the doorbell rang, irritated that someone would visit so late. I was grading papers at the kitchen table, surrounded by my students' science projects, waiting for James to call before bedtime, as he always did when travelling. 2 officers stood on our porch, their expressions sombre. The older one, Officer Rivera, removed his hat. The younger one couldn't meet my eyes. I knew before they spoke. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Officer Rivera, and this is Officer Bennett. May we come in?" The rest blurs into fragments. Words like highway, truck driver fell asleep and died instantly, floated around me. They assured me James hadn't suffered, as if that was supposed to comfort me. I collapsed onto the sofa, my students' papers scattering across the floor. Officer Bennett brought me water I couldn't drink. They asked if someone could stay with me. I called my sister Amy, who lived an hour away. The next few days passed in a fog. Amy handled most of the funeral arrangements while I moved through our house like a ghost touching James's things, trying to comprehend that he would never come home again. His toothbrush still stood next to mine, his coffee mug still sat in the dish drainer, his shoes still waited by the door. The funeral was held the following Tuesday. It was unseasonably warm for October, the kind of beautiful fall day James would have loved. The church overflowed with people, our families, our friends, my colleagues from school, James's co-workers. The outpouring of support was overwhelming, yet I felt completely alone. What struck me during the service was how many people I didn't recognize. Faces I'd never seen before approached me with condolences, sharing stories about James that seemed to describe a different man than the one I'd married. A tall woman with silver hair told me how James had helped her son secure an internship. An elderly gentleman recalled James's patience in explaining structural principles to him during a community project. A young couple thanked me for James's mentorship that had changed their lives. While these strangers filed past, one man caught my attention. He stood at the back of the reception hall, never approaching the receiving line. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and watchful eyes, he seemed to be observing rather than mourning. When most guests had departed, he finally approached me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said softly, "I'm deeply sorry for your loss." He pressed something into my hand, a folded handkerchief with the initials JW embroidered in the corner. James's handkerchief. "He wanted you to have this," the man said, then turned to leave. "Wait," I called after him. "How did you know James?" He hesitated. "We were old friends. He was a good man." Then he was gone before I could ask more questions. I unfolded the handkerchief later that night and found nothing unusual about it. Just a plain white handkerchief with my husband's initials. I was too exhausted by grief to wonder how this stranger had obtained it or what message it might convey. The weeks following the funeral revealed harsh realities I wasn't prepared for. James had always handled our finances, assuring me everything was in order. It wasn't. There was a second mortgage on our house I knew nothing about, credit card debt, a personal loan from his company. Our savings account contained less than half the amount I'd thought. Bills piled up. The The house needed expensive repairs we'd been postponing. My teacher's salary wasn't enough to cover everything. Each day brought another financial surprise, another burden I wasn't equipped to handle alone. 3 months after James died, I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by overdue notices, and made a decision. I would sell some assets, starting with the garage. James had invested significant money in his tools and equipment. The space itself could be converted into a small rental unit for additional income. It made practical sense. The only problem was that I'd need to enter the garage first, something I hadn't done since James died. I'd avoided it, preserving it as a shrine to him, but necessity finally outweighed sentiment. I searched for the garage key in all the obvious places. His dresser drawers, his desk, his nightstand. Nothing. Finally, in the back of his sock drawer, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside lay a single key on a leather cord with a silver T charm attached. I frowned, wondering why James would have a key with my initial on it that I'd never seen before. Whatever the reason, it fit perfectly into the garage door lock. The garage door creaked open, releasing the scent of sawdust metal and James's cologne. I stood frozen in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sensory reminder of my husband. His presence lingered here more strongly than anywhere else in our home. For a moment, I could almost believe he might walk in wiping his hands on a rag, asking what I was doing in his space. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating the workshop exactly as James had left it. A half-completed bookshelf stood in one corner, waiting for sanding and staining. His tools hung in precise order on a pegboard wall. Blueprints and sketches were pinned to a large corkboard. Everything was meticulously organized, reflecting James's methodical nature. I moved slowly around the perimeter, running my fingers over his workbench, picking up a hammer he'd once held. Each object carried memories: the drill he'd used to hang our wedding photos, the sander that had transformed our dining table, the jars of screws labeled in his neat handwriting. I opened his toolbox and found a small photo of us tucked inside the lid. A candid shot from our hiking trip to Colorado. My throat tightened. "Focus, Tessa," I whispered to myself. "You're here to inventory, not reminisce." I began cataloguing items for sale, noting brands and conditions in a small notebook. The practical task helped stem my emotions. High-quality power tools, a professional workbench, specialized equipment, all could fetch decent prices. I estimated values based on online research I'd done beforehand, though many items held sentimental value far exceeding their monetary worth. When I reached the far wall where a tall bookcase stood, something caught my attention. Unlike the other furniture in the garage, this bookcase wasn't secured to the wall with brackets, despite James's insistence on anchoring all tall furniture for safety. Instead, it seemed to float slightly away from the wall. Curious, I examined the edges more closely and noticed scuff marks on the concrete floor, suggesting the bookcase had been moved repeatedly. I placed my hands on the side and pushed gently. To my surprise, it swiveled easily, revealing a section of wall that looked different from the rest. Newer drywall painted to match, but clearly a later addition. In the center of this wall section was a small brass keyhole. My heart raced as I withdrew the key with the T-charm. It slid into the lock, perfectly turning with a satisfying click. A door-sized section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden room beyond. "Oh my God," I whispered, fumbling for the light switch inside. A soft lamp illuminated a space roughly 8 feet square. Unlike the practical workspace of the garage, this room was furnished with care and intention. A small antique desk with an old-fashioned banker's lamp, a comfortable reading chair with a throw blanket draped across it, bookshelves lining one wall, and most striking of all, dozens of wooden boxes stacked neatly on the shelves, each labelled with dates spanning the 12 years of our marriage. I approached the nearest shelf with trembling hands and pulled down one of the boxes. Inside, I found neatly arranged envelopes, all addressed the same way, to Tessa. Each envelope was sealed and dated, organized chronologically. The handwriting was unmistakably James's, the same script that had signed birthday cards and grocery lists for years. I selected an envelope from the middle of the box, dated 5 years earlier, and carefully opened it. Inside was a letter written on heavy stationery, beginning with words that stopped my breath. My dearest Tessa, today marks our 7th wedding anniversary. Though you're probably reading this long after that date has passed, if you're finding these letters, it means I'm no longer with you, and for that, I'm so deeply sorry. I sank into the reading chair, clutching the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by the discovery. My husband, who I thought I knew completely, had maintained a secret room for years, filled with letters I was never meant to read while he was alive. Hundreds of letters, all addressed to me, a hidden history of our marriage I never knew existed. With shaking hands, I reached for the earliest box labelled 2011, the year we met. The first letter was dated the very day we encountered each other in the library. As I began to read, James's voice seemed to fill the small room, bringing him back to me in a way I never expected. My dearest Tessa, today I met the woman I'm going to marry. I know how crazy that sounds. We've spent exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes together in the university library, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You reached for Burton's Elements of Architecture at the exact moment I did. Our fingers touched, and I swear something electrical passed between us. You apologised and tried to let me take the book, but I insisted you have it. Truth is, I don't even need that book. I'm not even taking architectural theory this semester. I just saw you heading to that section and followed because something about your determined walk and the way you tucked your hair behind your ear made me want to know you. When you smiled and suggested we share the book, I couldn't believe my luck. We sat together at that back table and I pretended to take notes while actually watching how you underline important passages with your red pen, how you mouth words silently when you're concentrating hard. You caught me staring twice and I fumbled with excuses about being distracted by your earrings, which are beautiful, by the way, little silver stars that catch the light when you move. You told me about wanting to teach elementary school how you believe education should nurture creativity rather than conformity. Your passion made your eyes light up. I could have listened to you talk for hours more. When you asked about my engineering studies, I shared more than I usually do with new people. Something about you made me feel safe. I don't know if you felt what I felt today. Maybe I'm just a random guy you met at the library. But Tessa Wilson, I hope someday you'll have my last name. I think you might be the most important person I'll ever meet. I've never believed in fate until today. I set down the first letter, tears streaming down my face. James had captured that day perfectly. The book, my earrings, even the red pen I used to mark text. But reading his immediate certainty about our future overwhelmed me. I remembered being attracted to him, but had no idea he'd felt so strongly from the very beginning. The next letter, dated a week later, described our first official date at a small Italian restaurant near campus. James wrote about his nervousness, how he'd changed shirts 3 times and arrived 30 minutes early to secure the perfect table. He detailed things I'd completely forgotten. The blue dress I wore, the way I laughed at his joke about engineering humour, how I absent-mindedly twisted my napkin when talking about my family. You told me about your parents' divorce and how it made you cautious about relationships, he wrote. I wanted to promise you then that I would never give you reason to doubt us, but it seemed too presumptuous on a first date. Instead, I memorized every expression that crossed your face, hoping for a chance to learn all of them over time. I continued reading through those early letters, each one capturing moments in our courtship from James's perspective. His proposal plans, he'd had 3 backup scenarios in case of bad weather, his anxiety before meeting my critical older sister, his joy when I said yes to marrying him. Each letter revealed layers of thought and feeling he'd never fully expressed aloud. As the dates progressed into our married years, the tone shifted slightly. James wrote about our daily life together, but also about things he apparently never felt comfortable saying directly. His fears about failing me, moments when he felt inadequate, dreams he had for our future. In a letter from our 3rd anniversary, I heard you talking to your friend Sarah about wanting children soon. I haven't told you how terrified I am of fatherhood. My own father was such a distant, critical figure. What if I inherit that inability to connect? But then I watch you with your students, so natural and nurturing, and I think maybe with your help I could learn to be the father our children deserve. I'm working on my courage to have this conversation with you properly. We'd eventually discussed children, deciding to wait until we were more financially stable. I had no idea James had been wrestling with these deeper fears. Then I found letters from the past year that mentioned something unexpected: James's health concerns. The headaches are getting worse, he wrote 6 months before his death. I should probably see a doctor, but I don't want to worry you over what's probably just stress. The new project at work has everyone putting in overtime. If they persist another week, I'll make an appointment. A letter dated just 2 months before the accident. Got the test results back today. The doctor wants me to see a specialist. I haven't told you because I see how much you're already juggling with your students' state testing coming up. There's no point in both of us worrying until I know something definite. I'm probably fine. My hands trembled as I realized James had been experiencing symptoms and seeking medical help without telling me. Had the accident truly been an accident? Or was there a medical event that caused it? The police report mentioned the truck driver falling asleep, but what if James had suffered some kind of episode while driving? The most recent letter was dated just days before his trip to Detroit, the last time I saw him alive. Tessa, my love, if you're reading these letters, then my worst fears have come to pass. I hope you can forgive me for keeping so much from you. I convinced myself it was for your protection, but perhaps that was just a coward's justification. There's so much you deserve to know. I couldn't bring myself to read further. The letter shook in my hands as I struggled to process what I'd discovered. James had been hiding significant health issues. What else had he concealed? And why create this elaborate secret room full of letters instead of simply talking to me? The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the garage windows. I'd been reading for hours, lost in James's words in his secret inner world. I gathered several boxes of letters and carried them into the house, knowing I would spend the night continuing to uncover the husband I apparently never fully knew. My kitchen table disappeared under stacks of letters as I worked through them chronologically, trying to piece together the full story. Around midnight, I reached letters from our 5th year of marriage, when James's writing began to hint at something beyond health concerns, something darker from his past. I saw someone today who reminded me of my life before you. One letter began, a ghost from my past. Though they didn't notice me, for a moment all the old fear came rushing back. I've worked so hard to bury Michael and become James Wilson completely, but there are moments when I worry it was all an illusion, that eventually the truth will surface and put you in danger. Michael, who was Michael? I frantically searched through more letters looking for clarification. Several mentioned my past life or who I used to be, but without specific details. Then, in a letter from 7 years ago, I found a fuller explanation. I should have told you this before we married, but I was afraid of losing you. My real name isn't James Wilson. I was born Michael James Reeves in Boston. 10 years before we met, I witnessed a murder committed by Victor Crane, the son of crime boss Anthony Crane. I testified against him, putting Victor in prison for life. The Crane family swore revenge, and despite their promises that the police couldn't protect me forever, I entered witness protection, moved to Chicago, and became James Wilson. I thought after so many years it was safe to build a normal life. Meeting you wasn't part of my plan, but falling in love with you was the most real thing that ever happened to me. Every day, I've debated telling you the truth. But how do you tell the woman you love that your entire identity is constructed? that loving me might put her in danger, that I've lied to her from the moment we met. The US Marshals warned me against marriage while in the program. Too risky, they said, but I couldn't let you go. Selfish, perhaps. I've taken every precaution to keep us safe. I check regularly for surveillance. I've maintained the fiction completely. As far as I know, the Cranes believe Michael Reeves disappeared forever or is dead, but the fear never leaves me entirely. I sat back stunned. My husband wasn't James Wilson. He was Michael Reeves, a protected witness who had created an entirely new identity. Our entire relationship was built on this fundamental deception. Yet as I read further, the love expressed in these letters felt more genuine than anything I'd ever known. Suddenly, the strange man at James's funeral made sense. Was he a US Marshal assigned to James's case? The handkerchief he'd given me, was it some kind of message or warning? More urgent questions flooded my mind. If the Crane family had been hunting for Michael/James all these years, did they finally find him? Was the accident truly an accident? And if they found him, would they come looking for me too? In a letter dated just last year, James wrote, "I've established a contingency fund for you in case anything happens to me. The account information is in a safety deposit box at First National Bank, downtown Box 723. The key is taped behind the frame of our wedding photo on my nightstand. The name on the account is Tessa Reeves, my real surname that I hope someday you might take if you can forgive me for all these deceptions." I immediately went to our bedroom and found the small key exactly where James had described. Another secret, another preparation for a worst-case scenario I never imagined. As I continued reading through the night, I discovered James had maintained contact with only one person who knew his true identity, a Chicago police detective named Frank Donovan, who had originally worked with him on the Crane case before James entered witness protection. In several letters, James mentioned meeting Frank discreetly for updates on the Crane family's activities. "Frank thinks I'm being paranoid," James wrote about 4 months before his death. He says Anthony Crane is elderly now, and with Victor serving life without parole, the organization has moved on. Maybe he's right. Maybe I've spent all these years looking over my shoulder for nothing. But last week, I saw a car parked across from my office building for 3 straight days. Same car, different driver each time. When I mentioned it to security, the car disappeared. Coincidence, perhaps, but my instincts are screaming otherwise. The final letter in the most recent box made my blood run cold. "Tessa, I'm almost certain I'm being watched. On my way to work yesterday, I noticed a man following me from the train station. I took a circuitous route and lost him, but it's the 3rd such incident this month. I've contacted Frank, who promises to look into it. My conference in Detroit next week might be good timing, a chance to disappear briefly while Frank investigates. I've considered telling you everything, bringing you with me, but that would only put you in danger too. For now, the safest place for you is our home, living your normal routine. If my fears prove founded, Frank knows what to do. He'll contact you with instructions. Trust him completely." The letter ended abruptly, as if James had been interrupted while writing. It was dated 3 days before his fatal trip to Detroit. As dawn broke, I sat surrounded by the paper fragments of my husband's secret life, trying to comprehend the implications. If James had been murdered rather than killed in an accident, the killers might believe he had evidence against them. They might come looking for that evidence. They might come looking for me. I needed to find Frank Donovan immediately. I spent the morning searching for information about Detective Frank Donovan. James had been careful never to store his contact information anywhere obvious. Nothing in our address book, nothing in his phone contacts. I searched through James's desk again, looking for business cards or notes. While rummaging through old files, I glanced out our front window and noticed an unfamiliar dark sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there earlier. My pulse quickened as I remembered James's words about being watched. Was I being paranoid now too, or was history repeating itself? I stepped away from the window and continued searching more urgently. In James's old wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, I finally found what I needed, a business card for Frank D., with only a phone number, no police department information or badge number. James had been cautious even with this. Before I could dial our house phone, rang startling me. We rarely received calls on the landline. Most people contacted me on my cell phone. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" I said cautiously. Silence, then a click as the caller hung up. I stood frozen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. It could be a wrong number or a telemarketer. But after what I'd learned about James, coincidences felt dangerous. I decided to use my cell phone instead of the landline to call Frank. The number rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Who's this? My name is Tessa Wilson," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I believe you knew my husband James Wilson. Or Michael Reeves." A long pause followed. Then, "Where are you calling from, Mrs. Wilson?" "My home." "Don't say another word. I'll call you back in 5 minutes on this number. Don't use your landline." He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone. Exactly 5 minutes later, it rang. "Are you somewhere private where you can talk?" Frank asked when I answered. "Yes." "How did you find this number?" "James left me letters. Hundreds of them. In a hidden room in his garage. He mentioned you in them." Another pause. "He told you about his past, not while he was alive. I only found the letters yesterday. I know about the Crane family, about his testimony. I know his real name was Michael." Frank sighed heavily. "James was a good man caught in a terrible situation. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Mrs. Wilson." "Was it really an accident?" I asked directly. "The car crash. The official investigation found no evidence of foul play," Frank said carefully. "The truck driver admitted to falling asleep at the wheel. But what? James contacted me about a week before his death. He believed he was being followed. I was looking into it when the accident happened. The timing was concerning." My heart pounded. "So it could have been murder." "I can't confirm that without evidence, but I've kept an eye on things since his death, including your house. Have you noticed anything unusual?" "Phone calls, unfamiliar vehicles." I described the dark sedan outside and the silent phone call. "Listen carefully, Tessa." Frank's voice lowered. "If James left letters, he might have left other things too. Things the Crane family would want back. Do you know about the safety deposit box?" "Yes, he mentioned it in one of the letters. I found the key." "Good. I'm going to text you an address. Meet me there in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Take a circuitous route, make sure you're not followed, and Tessa, bring the key." After hanging up, I gathered some of the letters, especially those mentioning the Cranes, and placed them in my bag along with the safety deposit box key. I was preparing to leave when I heard a noise from the direction of the backyard, the sound of breaking glass. I froze, then moved quickly to the kitchen window. The door to James's garage was open, though I was certain I had locked it. Someone was inside. Grabbing my car keys and phone, I slipped out the front door as quietly as possible and hurried to my car. As I pulled away, I glimpsed a man emerging from the side of our house. In the rearview mirror, I saw him watching my departure, then speaking into a phone. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, taking random turns, doubling back occasionally to ensure I wasn't followed. Finally convinced I was alone, I headed toward the address Frank had sent, a coffee shop downtown. Frank was easy to identify. Tall, salt and pepper hair, watchful eyes. The same man who had given me James's handkerchief at the funeral. He sat in a corner booth nursing a coffee. "Anyone follow you?" he asked as I slid into the seat across from him. I shook my head. "Someone broke into the garage. I left before they could see me." Frank nodded grimly. "They're looking for evidence. James helped build the original case against Victor Crane, But rumor has it he continued collecting information about the family's operations even after entering witness protection, information that could bring down what remains of their organization. Why would he do that? It sounds incredibly dangerous. James was haunted by his decision to testify. A key witness backed out at the last minute, leaving James's testimony as the centerpiece of the case. The person who backed out was later found dead. James felt responsible for not securing a stronger case against the entire family. I think he was gathering insurance protection for himself and eventually for you. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man I'd married. So, what do we do now? We need to check that safety deposit box. If James collected evidence against the Cranes, that's where he'd keep it. The bank was only a few blocks away. As we walked, Frank filled me in on more details about James's past, how he'd witnessed Victor Crane murder a business rival, how the case had been built, and how James had disappeared into the witness protection program afterward. He was supposed to avoid forming attachments, Frank said, but then he met you. He called me after your first date, conflicted about pursuing a relationship. I advised against it. He obviously didn't listen. So our entire relationship was against the rules, I asked. Frank shrugged. James believed you were worth the risk. From what I saw at the funeral, he was right. At the bank, I presented my ID and the key. The manager led us to a private room with the safety deposit box. When she left, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a thick envelope containing $50,000 in cash, a passport for Tessa Reeves, and a sealed USB drive with a note attached in James's handwriting, insurance. Use only if necessary. Beneath these items was a manila folder containing documents, financial records, photographs, and handwritten notes. Frank examined them with growing excitement. "This is it," he whispered. Transaction records linking the Crane family to money laundering operations, photos connecting them to current criminal activities, names of corrupt officials on their payroll. This is enough to dismantle what's left of their organization. "What do we do with it?" I asked. "I need to get this to the FBI immediately," Frank said. "It's too big for local law enforcement, and you need to go somewhere safe until this plays out. The people who broke into your garage won't stop looking." As we left the bank, Frank suggested I pack essentials and meet him at the police station where he would arrange protective custody. I agreed, though the thought of leaving my home and job behind was overwhelming. "Tessa," Frank said, before we parted, "James made a difficult choice keeping his past from you, but everything he did to protect you. Remember that." I nodded, still processing the stranger my husband had been. As I walked back to my car, I noticed the same dark sedan from earlier turning onto the street behind us. I quickened my pace, suddenly very aware that the danger James had feared for years had now transferred to me. When I arrived home, the garage door stood wide open. I parked on the street and approached cautiously, scanning the area for signs of the intruder. The house appeared empty, but I couldn't be certain. I entered through the front door, moving silently toward the bedroom to pack as Frank had instructed. As I passed the living room, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to find a man standing in the hallway, average height, nondescript features, but cold eyes that assessed me clinically. "Mrs. Wilson," he said calmly. "Or should I say, Mrs. Reeves. We need to have a conversation about your husband's possessions." I stepped backward, keeping distance between us. "There's nothing here for you. The police are on their way." He smiled slightly. "No, they aren't, but let's not complicate things unnecessarily. I'm looking for documents that belong to your husband, digital files most likely. Hand them over and I'll leave peacefully." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, edging toward the kitchen where my phone lay on the counter. "Your husband spent years collecting information about my employers. Information that wasn't his to take. After his unfortunate accident, we assumed any such material died with him, but recent developments suggest otherwise." His gaze flicked toward the garage. "The hidden room was quite impressive. Very thorough, your husband." My mind raced. Frank had the USB drive and documents, This man didn't know we'd already retrieved them from the bank. I could use that. I found letters, I admitted. Nothing else. The letters mentioned something valuable, though, didn't they? He took a step closer. A safety deposit box, perhaps. A storage unit. Michael was meticulous about contingency plans. A car door slammed outside and the man glanced toward the window. "We don't have to be adversaries, Mrs. Wilson," he said. "My employers simply want their property returned. Provide the location and you can continue your life undisturbed." "I need time," I stalled. "I'm still going through his things." The front door opened and Frank stepped in his hand, resting on the gun at his hip. "Tessa, are you?" The intruder moved with shocking speed, pulling a weapon from inside his jacket. I dropped to the floor as 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. When I looked up, both men were down. Frank had managed to fire his weapon despite being hit, catching the intruder in the shoulder. I crawled to Frank, who was clutching his side blood seeping between his fingers. "Call 911, he gasped. The intruder was struggling to stand, his own wound seemingly less severe. I lunged for Frank's fallen gun and pointed it at him with shaking hands. "Don't move," I commanded, surprising myself with my steadiness. For a tense moment, the intruder considered his options. Then sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Someone had heard the gunshots and called the police. The man backed toward the rear door. "This isn't over," he warned, then disappeared into the backyard. When the police arrived, they found me applying pressure to Frank's wound with a kitchen towel. He was conscious but losing blood rapidly. As paramedics loaded him into an ambulance, he gripped my wrist. "The USB," he whispered. "I made a copy. It's in your mailbox. Take it to FBI Special Agent Lauren Calloway. Only her. Tell no one else." Within hours, I was sitting in a secure room at the FBI field office, recounting my story to Agent Calloway, a stern-faced woman with compassionate eyes. The contents of the USB drive were being analysed in another room. "Detective Donovan will recover," she assured me. "The bullet missed vital organs. And the man who shot him, still at large. We have a description and are working with local police." I wrapped my hands around a cup of lukewarm coffee. "What happens now?" Agent Calloway leaned forward. "The information your husband gathered is incredibly valuable. Names, dates, financial transactions. It's a roadmap to what remains of the Crane organization. Anthony Crane died 3 years ago, but his nephew Marcus has been rebuilding the family business. This evidence will dismantle those efforts completely. And me, what happens to me? We'll need your testimony about finding the evidence. After that, you have options." She outlined the possibilities: enter witness protection myself, start fresh with a new identity in a new city, or accept round-the-clock protection during the investigation and trial, then return to a modified version of my life afterward. As she spoke, I thought about the letters in James's secret room, about his double life and the lonely burden he'd carried, about his love for me that had compelled him to risk everything. "I need time to decide," I said finally. Agent Calloway nodded. "Of course. For now, you'll stay in a safe house. We've already sent agents to secure your home and collect essential items. The letters your husband left will be catalogued as evidence, but returned to you eventually." That night, in a nondescript apartment under FBI protection, I cried for the first time since discovering the hidden room. I cried for James Michael and the constant fear he must have lived with. I cried for our marriage built on necessary lies. I cried for the future we'd planned that would never come to pass. But as tears subsided, something unexpected emerged. Not just grief, but determination. James had sacrificed everything to build evidence against the people who had threatened our lives. I would not let that sacrifice be in vain. In the weeks that followed, I worked closely with the FBI as they built their case against the remaining Crane organization. Marcus Crane and 17 associates were arrested in coordinated raids. The man who had broken into our home was identified as Logan Mercer, a hired enforcer for the Cranes. He was eventually apprehended trying to cross into Canada. Frank recovered from his injuries and provided crucial testimony linking James's evidence to ongoing investigations. The case made national headlines. Witness from beyond the grave brings down crime family. When it was over, I made my decision. I would not disappear into witness protection. I would reclaim my life, or rather build a new one that honoured both the man I'd married and the truth I now knew. 6 months after discovering James's hidden room, I stood in the garage doorway, surveying the transformed space. The workbenches remained, but I'd added my own touches. Colourful cushions on the reading chair, framed photos on the walls, potted plants in sunny corners. The secret room behind the bookcase was now my private sanctuary, where James's letters remained preserved in their wooden boxes. I decided not to sell the garage after all. Instead, I'd converted half of it into a small writing studio where I worked on a memoir about grief secrets and forgiveness. The advance from the publisher had helped stabilise my finances, along with the contingency fund James had established for me. The process of healing had been neither quick nor linear. Some days, I felt angry at James for his deception, for putting us both at risk by pursuing a relationship he knew was dangerous. Other days, I felt overwhelming gratitude for his protection and love that transcended even death. Most days I felt both emotions simultaneously, learning to hold these contradictions as part of loving someone complex and human. Frank had become an unexpected friend, filling in gaps in James's history that the letters didn't cover. He told me about the brave, principled young man who risked everything to testify against a powerful criminal, about how James had struggled with the isolation of witness protection until meeting me, about his determination to create evidence that would eventually free us both from the shadow of the Crane family. He was planning to tell you everything, Frank said during one of our coffee meetings. After the Detroit conference, he'd decided it was time. He couldn't bear the secrets anymore. Learning this brought both pain and peace. Knowing James had been moving toward honesty when death intervened, the FBI had kept their promise, returning James's letters after the trial concluded. Reading them had become part of my evening ritual, one letter each night before bed, spanning our relationship chronologically. Through his words, I discovered a husband more thoughtful, more vulnerable, and more loving than I'd realised during our life together. In response, I began writing my own letters to James, storing them alongside his in the wooden boxes. Sometimes I shared mundane details of my day. Sometimes I asked questions he could never answer. Sometimes I expressed anger at his deception. Always I ended with love, because despite everything that remained true, I understand now why you kept your secrets, I wrote in one letter. You thought you were protecting me. Perhaps you were right. But I wish we'd had the chance to face the truth together, to decide together what risks were worth taking. I would have chosen you, James. Every time I would have chosen you. Gradually, I rebuilt connections with friends and returned to teaching, though at a different school where I could start fresh. I'd changed in ways difficult to articulate to those who didn't know the full story. How do you explain that the person you loved most wasn't who you thought, yet somehow was more authentically himself than you'd realised? The danger had passed with the Crane organisation dismantled, but the experience had left me vigilant. I still checked my rearview mirror for following vehicles, still noticed strangers who lingered too long on my street. Frank assured me this hyper-awareness would fade with time. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled outside the garage windows, I sat in the secret room reading one of the final letters James had written. His words captured what I'd come to understand about our relationship. Love isn't just about sharing the good parts of ourselves. It's about trusting someone with our darkness, our fear, our shame. I failed at that, Tessa. I kept those parts locked away, thinking I was protecting you. Now I see that in trying to shield you from danger, I denied you the chance to truly know me. If I could do it all again, I would choose differently. I would choose truth, whatever the consequences, because a love built on partial truths is itself only partially realized. I closed the letter, running my fingers over James's handwriting. He was right, of course. Our love had been genuine, but incomplete, bounded by the secrets he kept. Yet even this imperfect love had been the most transformative experience of my life. In the months since discovering his letters, I'd come to realize that none of us ever fully knows another person. We glimpse facets, fragments shown in particular lights. James had shown me many true parts of himself while concealing others. The man I loved existed within the man who deceived me. Not separate, but intertwined. I'd also learned that forgiveness isn't a single moment of absolution, but a continuing choice. Each day, I chose to forgive James for his secrets, to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, to forgive the circumstances that forced such impossible choices on us both. The hidden room that once represented deception had become a place of healing. Here, surrounded by James's words and my responses, I found a new kind of intimacy with my husband, one that transcended his death and the revelations that followed. Through his letters, we continued a conversation that would shape the rest of my life. Sometimes the deepest love stories are written in secret, and the most beautiful letters are the ones we never expected to receive. What secret would you keep to protect someone you love more than life itself? What truth would you need to share despite the risks? If you've experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. Thank you for listening to my journey through grief, betrayal, and ultimately understanding. May we all find the courage to love authentically, even when it's frightening to do so.